The US and Iran have almost reached an agreement to end the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And apparently because of that, Trump is pausing Project Freedom, the operation he announced to reopen the waterway on Sunday, which Pete Hegseth claimed yesterday had already cleared the way for commercial ships to pass through, all because 2 American naval destroyers followed by 2 merchant vessels were able to transit the strait on Monday. And you had Hegseth saying that hundreds more ships from nations around the world were lining up to go. Never mind that those American ships had to fight off multiple Iranian attacks, which also targeted other ships and tankers, a residential building in Oman, and an oil facility in the UAE. And that's while hundreds of other vessels carrying up to 23,000 crew members remained stranded in the Persian Gulf and, in fact, didn't seem all that interested in following. Or with Iran continuing to claim control over the strait and announcing a new mechanism to oversee maritime traffic through the waterway. And throughout all that, you had Hegseth insisting that the ceasefire remained in effect, with General Dan Kane arguing that Iranian attacks had not met the threshold for restarting major combat operations. And then, it was only hours later that you had Trump writing on social media that great progress had been made toward a complete and final agreement with Iran, announcing that the operation would be paused for a short period of time to see whether that agreement could be finalized and signed. And then you had Axios later reporting that the administration believed it was nearing an agreement with Iran regarding a 1-page memorandum of understanding, which would also apparently not really be a complete and final agreement like Trump said, but would provide a framework for further negotiations focused on the nuclear issue. But in any case, the memorandum would reportedly declare an end to the war and open a 30-day window for negotiating a detailed agreement. And among other issues, that deal would involve Iran committing to a moratorium on nuclear enrichment, the U.S. agreeing to lift its sanctions and release billions in frozen Iranian funds, and both the U.S. and Iran lifting restrictions around transit through the Strait of Hormuz. Also, I'll say regarding the strait, both sides would begin gradually lifting restrictions during the 30-day period. And that's a key point, because every single day that it remains closed has a huge impact. Though it also stands out because Iran previously suggested reopening the strait and negotiating the nuclear issue afterward. And Trump rejected that offer, saying the nuclear issue had to be addressed. So with that, the administration has reportedly made clear that it would be able to resume military action if talks collapse. So he's not necessarily fully backing down on that issue, but also maybe he is. And then also with everything, the duration of the moratorium on uranium enrichment reportedly remains one of the most significant points of contention. You had Iran previously proposing a 5-year ban, the US demanded 20, but now you have 3 sources telling Axios that it would be at least 12 years, with one saying 15 is the likely landing spot, which again is something that stands out because 15 years was also the length of time of the nuclear deal negotiated under Obama. Though also in that case, it wasn't a full ban on enrichment. Instead, enrichment was capped at 3.67%, which is enough for civilian purposes, but far below the 90% needed for a nuclear weapon. In the Trump administration, they're reportedly pushing for a provision that would have any Iranian violation extend the timeline, with enrichment capped at 3.67% even after its end. Also, according to some of Axios' sources, Iran would commit to never seek a nuclear weapon or conduct weaponization-related activities. It would remove its current stockpile of highly enriched uranium from the country, and it would agree to an enhanced inspections regime, including snap inspections by UN inspectors. And then finally, of the 2 sides reportedly discussing a clause whereby Iran would commit not to operate underground nuclear facilities. And while it's definitely far too soon to see if this is going to work out, the markets, I'll say, reacted very positively. Right? Oil prices fell roughly 11%, back under $100 a barrel. Still way up from before the war, but definitely a huge change. And so also with all this, you had some sources saying that the US was expecting Iranian responses on several key points within the next 48 hours, and also claiming that it was the closest that the 2 sides have been to an agreement since this war began. Then also, you have the White House reportedly believing that the Iranian leadership is divided and may not be able to reach a consensus, and some American officials remain unconvinced that even this initial 1-page memorandum is going to get finalized. And as far as Iran publicly, so far they've only said that they were reviewing a new US proposal and would give it an answer soon via Pakistan. Though there, you had an Iranian news agency saying that the text contained unacceptable clauses and was just propaganda, quote, aimed at justifying Trump's retreat from his recent hostile action. And that, as you had a spokesperson for the country's Parliamentary National Security Committee describing it as more of an American wish list than a reality, saying the Americans will not gain anything in a war they are losing that they have not gained in face-to-face negotiations. Though again, we'll have to wait to see. A lot of people on both sides have been saying a lot of things. We'll have to see what the official response is. Like, does it match the rhetoric? Though also in the meantime, you had Trump trying to apply pressure, writing in another post this morning, assuming Iran agrees to give what has been agreed to, which is perhaps a big assumption, the already legendary epic fury will be at an end, and the highly effective blockade will allow the Hormuz Strait to be open to all, including Iran. But adding, if they don't agree, the bombing starts, and it will be, sadly, at a much higher level and intensity than it was before. And with all that, despite talk of an imminent deal, he later told the New York Post that it was still too soon to consider face-to-face meetings with Iran. But then he told PBS that the war had a very good chance of ending, while also adding, if they agree, it's over. If they don't agree, we bomb. And that option is something that a number of his supporters would prefer. Supporters like Senator Lindsey Graham, who's been a staunch supporter of the war, arguing that Iran's recent attacks on the UAE and ships in the Gulf more than justifies a big, strong, and short response to inflict further damage on Iran's war machine. And that is his other great idea, which he told Fox News about yesterday, is what he calls a Second Amendment solution.
I love the idea of a Second Amendment solution for the Iranian people. So if I were President Trump and I were Israel, I would load the Iranian people up with weapons so they could go to the streets armed and turn the tide of battle inside Iran. We don't need American boots on the ground. We've got millions of boots on the ground in Iran. They just don't have any weapons. Give them the weapons so they can rise up like we did to destroy this regime.
So with that, it's only kind of recently that he's seemingly changing his stance on putting American boots on the ground, having done kind of a total 180 on his prior call for the U.S. to take Karg Island. Though Lindsey still says that he thinks that we ought to tell the Iranians we will destroy it from the air. And then also, beyond politicians, while we talked a lot about MAGA backlash to this war, other Trump supporters, they remain on board with further military action.
The easiest move for the United States to make right now would be to just blow up Karg Island. Karg Island, you could do an amphibious operation there. It's a lot riskier. Or you could just blow it up. It could blow up Karg Island. We could hit other energy resources inside the country. We could take down another layer of the IRGC. We'll probably have to do at some point another kinetic action against missile facilities that have been uncovered over the course of the last few weeks.
Now, if the U.S. does attack Iran again, it's unclear whether the administration will have to come up with another new name for the mission. Or because, yes, you had Trump saying in that post this morning that Operation Epic Fury could soon be, quote, at an end. But you also had Secretary of State Marco Rubio telling reporters yesterday,
the Operation Epic Fury is concluded. We achieved the objectives of that operation.
And Rubio said that to justify the administration's claim that they haven't violated the 60-day time limit for engaging in hostilities without permission from Congress. Though many experts say that's kind of a load of crap. But to focus on the second part of that statement for a second, it is far from clear that the administration's objectives have actually been accomplished. Trump himself described the goals of this war as including Iran never having a nuclear program, the destruction of the country's ballistic missiles, and creating the conditions for the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow the regime. But U.S. intelligence reportedly says that Iran could still probably have a nuclear weapon in a year if it wanted. Assessments also appear to show that more than half of the country's missiles and launchers have survived, and it's not clear that the current proposal makes any mention of that issue. And hardline elements of the Iranian regime may have even more power now as it cracks down on dissent, executes protesters, and restricts internet access. And then, of course, on top of everything, a problem that didn't exist before, the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. And while the administration has overstated its own accomplishments, it may have also downplayed Iran's. You now have the Washington Post reporting that based on satellite imagery, Iran has hit far more U.S. military assets than has been publicly acknowledged by the White House. But apparently, Iranian airstrikes have damaged or destroyed at least 228 structures or pieces of equipment at American military sites across the Middle East since this war began, hitting hangars, barracks, fuel depots, aircraft and key radar, communications, and air defense equipment. One expert told them the Iranian attacks were precise. There are no random craters indicating misses. Though we also noted that he and other experts don't believe that the attacks have significantly limited the military's ability to conduct its bombing campaign in Iran. And they also noted that some of the damage may have occurred after U.S. troops already left the bases, making protection of the structures less vital. Though still, we're talking about Trump's actions that have left 13 U.S. troops killed and several hundred more injured over the course of this war. And while there's a version of events where, that is the end of all this, there's a version where this is just still kind of the beginning. And so for now, we're gonna have to wait to see what happens with the current negotiations. And in the meantime, I really would love to know your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you in those comments down below.